Margot is wearing the head of a bear. Willow is scaring the crows with a stare. Daphne is watching, for she is quite stuck. We will see how many leaves we can pluck. Isn't it sweet? When we are hungry, we'll find things to eat, stolen from sellers who shout in the street. Strawberries that dribble with juice in the heat. Ribbons all stream from a magic machine, powered by gypsies who look like a dream. Dark eyes revealing what they really mean. Don't you just love falling in love? Chin on your shoulder, I feel like a dove. The world of much older is covered in dust. Barefoot we stray from a world in decay. Take a small piece and the colours will stay.
Welcome to the fifth in the series of Salons presented by MSL. My name is Debbie Warren. I am a Hastings-based musician, composer and arranger. And today we are going to be looking at A Derelict Chorale. Now, earlier this year, America Ground artist in residence, Chris Thorpe-Tracey, was researching the period of history from the early 1800s to 1835. He was looking specifically at the land known as the America Ground, which was a thriving community but an illegal settlement on what was then the outskirts of Hastings. Now, of course, it's very much part of our town centre. Now, the stories and the people and the characters and the events that he discovered inspired him to write a series of 10 songs. Now, in 1835, the America Ground was cleared and left desolate and empty for many years. Derelict, if you like, hence the title, A Derelict Chorale. Now, I'm delighted that Chris is joining me today to talk about his songs. We will be looking at 5 of the 10 songs in total. And I'm also joined by local historian Julie Gidlow to give us a little bit of historical background. Now, Chris Thorpe-Tracey is a composer, a writer, and a broadcaster from Brighton. But before we meet him, we are just going to have a little snippet of one of the songs to whet your appetite for later. Hello, Chris.
Hi, how are you? It's lovely to be with you.
I'm very good, thank you. So that music that we heard there, your intro music, if you like, your entrance, was the introduction, yes, to the song "The Murder of Captain Aldrich." Now that's an intriguing title, a true story, and set against the backdrop of smuggling in Hastings. So do tell us more.
Well, Edward Aldrich was the captain of a fishing boat and a core part of Hastings' fishing community at the time. But possibly all of them, but certainly many of them, they would also take the boats out after dark and get involved in some smuggling. Before I talk about him specifically, I ought to say, for context, that this song takes place very early in the America Ground period, arguably even before the America Ground had really got started, before a lot of people had moved to that area. So it was still a kind of sparsely populated area. And I had a couple of reasons why I wanted to include the story, because it does a really good job of setting the scene of what life was like there and the kind of conflicts that were going on between local communities who were struggling to make a living and the authorities, and that kind of atmosphere. That one of the things that happens is, Captain Aldrich and his boat are out smuggling and they get caught and they end up in a a violent affray with customs men, excise men, also on a boat. They've got a much smarter boat, like a faster, newer boat, the cops, as it were. And during this affray, which is violent on both sides, but basically Captain Aldrich gets killed by excise men, and then he is buried at All Saints, and you can see his grave now. He's still there. One of the interesting things is that in the church registry record of the funeral, they say that he was killed. So there's a kind of political act going on, even in the keeping of the records at the church. And also what happens at the funeral is that as well as the family, there are a lot of local people. He was a very popular local figure, and you get one of the first senses of not full on uprising, but a group of local people, all of whom struggle with daily life. They are poor, they are working off, very meagre resources to make their way in the world, and they feel hugely oppressed by the kind of authorities of the time. I mean, this is long before the police force, the modern idea of a police force. So customs men are kind of recruited, often navy men recruited. One of the really fascinating things I learned about the smuggling industry that was going on the south coast along that time, which was a huge industry, it's just enormous swathes of people involved, is that it was going on while the Napoleonic Wars were taking place on both coasts. So you've got two countries officially very passionately at war with each other. We hated Napoleon in popular culture in England at the time. He was this bogeyman figure, you really despised, and yet at the same time you've got English free traders, as they called themselves, the smugglers, trading with the French right along the coast, and you've got our navy attacking and killing our fishermen, and then you've got the French navy attacking and killing their fishermen for taking part in this illegal trade. So it's it really puts the perspective. I just loved that sense of realizing that not everyone's got the same views about the conflict as it's going on, and it also really sets the scene for the kind of way that the America Ground will develop as people move in. The America Ground basically existed purely as it's an area outside the jurisdiction of what was called Hastings Corporation, which would have been like a council at the time, and a very powerful organisation. But you don't have a welfare state. You don't have anyone being given significant amount of support if they're struggling, but you do have tax collection. So there's an extraordinary kind of top-down power, and the power ended along a very strictly delineated line in the map, and there's an empty space of derelict land on the seafront beyond that line, so basically technically sort of outside the jurisdiction of the corporation, and that's where this community sprang up.
That's really fascinating. When the customs and excise men would catch the smugglers, they had something quite significant they did to their boats, didn't they?
Yeah, and this also connects with the way that the human community forms on that seafront, which is that they would impound the boats, take them, confiscate them, steal them, and then they would pull them, drag them up onto the beach at Hastings, quite high up, and this is even quite large boats, and then they trash the hull so it was no longer seaworthy. So that they'd basically smash a big hole in the hull, but often they would split the hulls fully in two, so you get this sense of a half hull. And then what happens, and it begins to happen right at the beginning of the 19th century, is that people actually make those grounded wrecks into their homes. And that the boat that Captain Aldrich was, well, so this is where, as a songwriter and as a sort of I have freer license than maybe a pure historian. I'm not a historian, I'm not a researcher, so I would like to say, well, so then these two particular people went and lived in the boat that was Captain Aldrich's hull. I'm not sure if it really was, but certainly the boat that Captain Aldrich was caught in would have been dragged and destroyed and left sort of derelict on the seashore, and then it was available for people to live in. And there are people that live in the same. There are a couple of people who I mentioned later on in the chorale who live in the same half hull of a boat for the entire time so that's for more than 20 years they live there, quite happily build a home, build a life, living in these abandoned half hulls of impounded boats. It's quite an amazing picture, and there are images of them, and it's an amazing.
Good. I think we might be getting to see some of those images later
Yeah.
when Julie talks to us. So I think, without further ado, I think we'd better have a listen to The Murder of Captain Aldrich.
On the night of April 23rd, a good strong wind prevailing, our captain set us out to sea, a perfect night for sailing. The Frenchies had some booze to sell, we knew just where they hid, so we took her round the headland east, but even as we did, there's a customs boat all slick and new, comes flying round the cliff. The brand new ship they call the Leopard, dark as she was swift. We pushed her off and fought her men with fist and bottle and knife, till one of them bastards shot our captain, made a widow of his wife. Made a widow of his wife. Well, they put him in the ground at All Saints Church. A crowd of people came alongside the grieving family, and anger grows the same. There's fury at the rich man's court where nothing good is done, and fury at the customs man so quick to shoot his guns, so quick to shoot his guns. Willful murder that it was, said the warden of the church. He shows us where he's written it down in the All Saints Register. Men like Edward Aldrich are the lifeblood of this town. They brand a good man a criminal, smash his boat and shoot him down. Shoot him down.
Okay, I think it's time to bring in Julie. Julie Gidlow is a Hastings-based historical researcher, and she worked alongside Chris for the research for some of his songs. So, hello, Julie.
Hello, Debbie. Thank you. As Debbie said, I've been the researcher for MSL for about 6 years now, and it was really exciting to be asked to come on board and help Chris with some of the research that he was doing in the early part of this year. So I spent a couple of days working alongside him, and as you'll hear in the session today, Chris has turned a lot of the stories into songs and the stories of the people. And what I've put together is a few slides to give you a sense of the history and how the America Ground developed. So if we can have a look at the first slide, we should be able to look at a map. So here you can see a map of Hastings that's dated 1778 to 1780. And this map shows Hastings as it was then, a very agricultural, rural environment. You can see the town itself nestling. If I move my mouse, you should be able to see, hopefully, the area where the houses are here. This is the area that we now know as the Old Town, but it's nestling between the West Hill and the East Hill. And that was the extent of the town at the end of the 18th century. So it's very small compared to how it is today. Slightly over to the west, you can see a large area here running up through a valley. There are two hills to the west here and to the east. So the red marker is just noting the valley as I'm driving my mouse through it. That valley originally had been sea going back many hundreds of years. So in medieval times, this was the original harbour, it's thought. Not the harbour as we know it today, but we think this was the original harbour of Hastings. And there were a series of storms in the 13th century which silted up the entrance to that harbour and caused the sea to get cut off and the harbour behind it. So you can see a kind of a bar here forming. Over a course of about 300 years, the land gradually got more solid until by the end of the 18th century it was possible to build on. And it started to be used, as Chris has mentioned, people started to come out of the old town in order to build properties, because there wasn't very much space where the old town originally was. So if we can look at the next slide, we'll see what that looks like actually on the ground. Just before it switches over, I'm just going to point out, I was just going to point out a windmill. I'll come back to that in a minute. This view shows you Hastings. It's about 1770. It may be slightly earlier. It's really hard to tell. But you can see this area here that we're looking at, which is very marshy in this picture, is today the entrance to Harold Place. That's where the buses turn up and go into the town centre. So you can see the castle up here on the cliff. And there's not very much else there, a few sheep on the bottom right hand side. The water that you can see is the Priory Stream, which runs still today through Alexandra Park, and that was a major watercourse running through the town centre. You can see some people crossing a bridge here in the bottom left hand side, making their way around the headland to Hastings, which is the other side of that cliff. This is looking towards the east, but if we look at the next slide, we'll see the same view looking back towards the west. And here, this is 1798, a painting, as I say, looking west towards St Leonard's. On the left-hand side here, you can see the White Rocks. And up on the hill, that is actually the White Rock cliff that's still there today. The windmill that you can see on the left-hand side was a mill that blew down in a dramatic storm in 1808. And the windmill to the right of that is roughly on the site of Hastings Museum. Sadly, no windmills exist in Hastings any longer, but it's a very windy town, as anyone who lives here will tell you. So they made very good use of the natural wind power back in those days. And here you can see some of the buildings that were starting to emerge on this dried up land that had once been sea. Coming towards the right, you can see this road and a little carriage on the right-hand side with carriage and horse. They're making their way around to the entrance of the old town. And the cliff that they're riding in front of is the cliff that now has Pelham Crescent carved into it. So this is the Castle Cliff, still there today, but looking very different to how it does here. So if we could have a look at the next slide, we'll see, didn't take very long for many more buildings to start taking up this land. This is a painting of 1811. This is actually showing the Rock Fair, which took place every year at the end of July. And that's a temporary structure, so everything that you see in the foreground, the tents and the stalls and all of the things that are there for the fair would only come once a year. But beyond that, towards the sea, you can see the ships that are pulled up, and you can see buildings ranged all the way along the shore there. There was shipbuilding in this area from very early on. As soon as people started encroaching onto this land, they built a shipyard right down at the base of the Castle Rock. And over to the left, this is really interesting. This is a lime kiln. They were doing lime burning at the foot of the cliff. Apparently, you can use seashells for lime burning. So there was plenty of that available here, so using local resources. This is the site of what will later be Wellington Square, well, Howard Place, and going up into Wellington Square on the left-hand side. And Wellington Square was going to be started around about 1815, so only a few years after this painting was made. The next picture should show us a close-up of the lime kiln, so you can get a closer, better look at that just before it was taken down. Here you can see the tracks on the bottom winding their way up Castle Hill. And that close-up shot, you can see the same structure as in the previous painting of 1811. So the earliest dwellings on this site weren't actually houses. As Chris has said, people were using boats. The very next slide should show us one of those boats, and it may be the one that Chris was mentioning. There was a hulk called the Polymena, which was brought to the America Ground in 1808. And it was still there in 1835 when the America Ground was closed down. As you can see in this picture, this is a massive boat, and the Polymena we know was divided into two and lived in by two separate families. So it was two tenements in this one building. So that did survive a long time, but it didn't take very long before houses infiltrated the whole area. So if we look at the next slide, that should show us the houses creeping around the bottom of the cliff. Here you can see the bottom of Castle Hill. There's the houses there, just starting to go up the road. There are the ships, and both here in the America Ground and also over in the Old Town area, which was being used as a harbour at that time. One of the first families to inhabit this site was the most prominent merchant family in Hastings, and that was the Breed's family. There were three Breed's brothers. They all owned a ship, and they were heavily involved in all kinds of trade. So they built a lot of the warehouses and a lot of the shipbuilding commercial properties that came onto the America Ground to support their own businesses. So you can still see in this picture there's not too much housing, but in the next slide we should see many more houses. It didn't take very long for the area to fill up. It's very rapid development. So we're looking further away. We're standing on the white rocks in this picture. There on the bottom right-hand side is a customs and excise man with his gun. These would later develop into the Coast Guard as we know them today, to be a life-saving force. But originally the Coast Guard was guarding the coast from illegal landing. So this is the smuggling that Chris is talking about. You can see here the houses and the extent of the growth, the rapid growth of the America Ground. So some were timber built, some were brick built, some of the boats did remain as we've mentioned. And you can see the road coming down. This is the road along the coast from St Leonard's. We know exactly what was going on in the America Ground because a survey was taken in 1827. And that tells us that the kind of trades that people were employed in here were largely to do with shipbuilding. So there were carpenters, mast builders, there were tallow houses, saw houses, there was butchers, bakers, even a confectioner. There was a school at one time. There were also a couple of inns and lodging houses and servants' quarters. So these were service industries. They were working in shipbuilding, but also serving the new the rich people, the new people that were coming into Hastings with money, and those people were inhabiting the houses you can see behind in Wellington Square. The last three slides will show us something very specific about the America Ground, what really caught our imagination. So if we could go on to the first of the last three. The rope walk you can see here at the very base of the plan. This was the plan from 1827, which accompanied the survey that was taken. And you can see here a very long straight road, or two long straight roads called a rope walk. Rope walks were literally what they say, walks on which you would make rope. And how the rope is made is that you have three separate yarns which are stretched the length of the walk that you've got available. They're attached to hooks at one end and they're twisted together under tension to form really strong rope. And the longer and straighter the walk you've got available, the longer your rope can be. So for shipbuilding, you need a really, really long stretch of land. So this was ideal. And it was the Breed's family who put in this rope walk very early on. It's thought to have been the first commercial thing that was there on the America Ground. Hard work, and some of the rope walks in England are incredibly long. So the one at Chatham Dockyards, which is I think now the only one in the world which is still working, is so long that the workers had to cycle up and down the length of it, because you'd have to walk along or travel along with the rope to make sure it didn't get too twisted as it was being made. Someone had to literally walk along next to it. We can have a look at what that looks like on the ground on the last two slides, one of which shows the view looking towards Hastings, I think. So that should be the next one coming up. and you'll see when it comes up, there's a structure which looks a bit like a goalpost. So these wooden poles here are marking out the length of the rope walk behind an upturned boat, which is also one of the boat shacks that was being lived in. And the very last slide shows the same view, but looking back in the other direction. And that is a slide showing the Priory Stream. This is the Priory Stream that we saw right at the beginning in that marshy land, still running out into the sea. In fact, it still runs into the sea today through a culvert that runs under Queen's Road. And here, behind the two men, you can see the structure again, looking like goalposts, very long, straight line.
Julie, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for that. I feel like I'm there, that I feel like I could live there, everything going on. It's very exciting. Now, the rope walk is great because it leads us very nicely on to our next song, which is called Doing the Rope Walk Tangle.
Rope man lays his weaving a line, end to end for the strongest twine. Fill us a warehouse in good time, doing the rope walk tango. And away down here where the river flowed, lay down a path, then an alley, then a road. Knots are tied, the money's owed, doing the rope walk tango. And it's an 8/3 and a 7/1. Weave those threads till your rope is done, but don't just step on the fibres, son, doing the rope walk tango. It's in your eyes and in your hair, hemp dust burns in the open air. Run to the far end if you dare, doing the rope walk tango. Because end to end it's half a mile. Run that alley in a single file. Twist the fibres in the Spanish style, doing the rope walk tango. It's an 8/3 and a 7/1. Weave those threads till your rope is done, but don't just step on the fibres, son, doing the rope walk tango. It's an 8/3 and a 7/1. Weave those threads till your back is gone, but don't just step on the fibres, son, doing the rope walk tango.
Hello, and we are back. Chris, I wanted to talk to you about this song. So the rope walk tangle, it's very rhythmic and very exciting, I think, this song. I'm feeling it's making me think of sea shanties and work songs. Is that your intention?
Definitely that's the inspiration. Either the really traditional ones, like the traditional whaling or fishing songs, or all kinds of work songs, or some of the more modern ones. I was particularly influenced by an album a few years ago by Kings of the South Seas, Ben Nicholls' band, that made a folk record of whaling songs but gave it a more rough-hewn style. And I think one of the most exciting things going on in folk music at the moment is a kind of move back towards rough-hewn impact, and they've put a little bit of the dirt and grime back into folk music recently, which I've really enjoyed, because prior to that it had all got a tiny bit twee and well produced. So it's been really nice to hear that, and I think I really wanted to capture the sense of you have to have that rhythm, and you have to have that like a labouring rhythm. And then for me also the chorus, where I used a load of numbers in the chorus. I really like the idea of like throwing in all these numbers to get a sense of like it's counting as well as doing a very physically strenuous activity. Yeah, I was going to say about the rope walk that the first person who moved into the wreck of the Polymena that Julie has just spoken about was a man called Thomas Page, and he was a rope maker. So he would have moved in at exactly the point where he would have had a work, you know, to do on that very rope walk. And I really love the kind of the flow of lives that you can follow in these stories, because almost to the very end of the time of the America Ground, Thomas Page is still there doing his rope walk tangle and living that life. Yeah.
So one sea shanty that it reminded me of is the it's called A Drop of Nelson's Blood,
Oh, yeah.
also commonly known as Roll the Old Chariot Along, which is the words of the chorus. So I thought I might just sing a couple, give you a little burst
brilliant.
of it. So the Nelson's Blood that's referred to is not literally Nelson's blood. If anyone's listening, I'm a bit worried about that. It's to do with when Nelson was killed in the Napoleonic Wars in 1805, Battle of Trafalgar, I think it was, wasn't it? Anyway, he was brought back to England in a casket that was filled with alcohol to preserve his body. But of course, there was a story that some naughty sailors decided they'd drill a hole in the casket and siphon off some of the alcohol. So Nelson's blood has become forever synonymous with rum or grog for the sailors. Anyway, it goes like this. Oh, hang on one second. Oh, a drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm. A drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm. A drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all hang on behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all hang on behind. And you can really feel that's a stamp and go shanty. That's the ones where they were stamping and walking and stamping and walking. So they kept this continuous movement as they were pulling the line. And I felt that in your chorus, the 8/3 and the 7/1, you know, like they're doing all their movements in synchronization.
It's fascinating that they're very rhythmic and they drive along, and yet often the minor key is there, especially like a minor first down to a major fifth type of key change, or not key change, chord change, and so you get a kind of blur of the kind of negative emotions of anger and tiredness and all of that, but you can still keep up the rhythm. So people dance to these things all the time, but at the same time they can be very bleak and dark and about hard work.
This is a very interesting project for MSL because it's in two phases. So essentially the first part was Chris researching the history and writing the songs. And we're now ready to move into the second phase, which is an open call for commissions for creatives to respond to Chris's work with a digital work of their own. Now, this could be reimagining the music in your own way. It could be illustrating it with artwork or film, but it has to be in digital format because it's going to be part of the Smart Heritage Map. Now, this is a very exciting bit of the internet that is only going to be available when you are physically standing in the America Ground in Hastings. So I think that's really quite cool. It's going to be an interactive experience for tourists and visitors to the America Ground. It's also, the work will feature as part of Coastal Currents. So if you go to the MSL website, you will be able to hear all 10 of Chris's songs there. You'll find out information about the project, the paid commissions, and how to express interest. So I wanted to ask you, Chris, because as a composer, we're used to kind of keeping our work very close to us. We copyright it and protect it, and we don't let other people use it without our permission. But here you're being asked to compose music that you are essentially going to be giving away. How did that make you feel?
I think actually my response was entirely positive because I've made music for a long time, and I have a lot of material out there that all sounds all different, and comes from different traditions, and I've sung about a lot of different topics. So at this point, I wonder if that kind of feeling of the protectiveness of stuff has slightly worn away, and especially because I'm not super famous and I haven't become the kind of person whose legacy is going to be fought over in the courts for millions or anything like that. I feel very light about sharing. And so for me, the idea that other artists of all disciplines, I mean, they could be visual artists, they could be coding digital artists, they could be other musicians or composers, that idea that they would invest that sort of time into having a look at something that I did and I set up as a starting point, it fills me with, it's a really exciting idea. And also there's a lot of ego in there as well. So many times as a sort of like an underground, not a super famous artist, you become, especially because part of my backstory is that I stopped touring a few years ago. So I had been a road warrior of a performer. I was doing 150 shows a year for 15 years. I was just living on the road. And so having left that behind, I think I'd come to a point where I'm accepting that as a composer, you just have to leave things where they are. And quite often that means your favourite bits of your own work will vanish. Well, not completely vanish, but they won't have a big life. There are a few songs I've written that do have a life of their own, and other artists sing them sometimes, and they have a kind of a wider pool than just me. But they're not the ones I really love. They're the kind of more splashy, obvious pop ones, or the kind of ones that touch certain people in certain ways. And so now I feel like I have quite a loose hold of all the stuff I've created ever, really. And so in a way, once you go in open-eyed and you go in to say, I'm not going to try and create a complete work, I'm going to try and respond to this. I found the history more interesting than the kind of nuts and bolts of composition, I think. And you go in and you think, I'm going to respond to this enormous wealth of new information. I didn't know about any of this stuff. And then the idea that someone else will take, so for example, my recordings that we've been listening to today are just homemade demo recordings, which is what I was producing. So I didn't have the pressure or obviously it was a sort of fairly modest timescale, and there was never going to be going into a big recording studio and putting together 25 musicians but so then to think, well, that still is open for other people to interpret how they may want to. And if in 10 years time I come back to it and go, actually, I'd like to record these properly now, I still can, So it's a very enticing idea as a creative person. Sorry, I'm waffling a little bit, but I do find it quite thrilling, the thought of, it reminds me, in my music world, like remixes are a big, lots of people do remixes, and there is nothing more thrilling than having a piece of work you've done and someone will take it away and do a remix, even if it's like, I did a long poem once and someone did a banging techno remix from it, and it was so exciting to hear that back, totally different from what I'd ever imagined. And so, yeah, I find this idea thrilling.
There we go. Maybe a banging techno version of
the
Roadbook Tango could feature on our Smart Heritage map. Okay, so let's get back to the songs. So the next song we're gonna look at is called The Battling Breeds. So this is all about the Breeds brothers that Julie mentioned earlier. They were entrepreneurs and businessmen and building things and having lots of businesses, but they were also quite colourful characters, weren't they? Do you want to just tell us very briefly anything that you found out that you've put in your songs?
There's three brothers, but I focused on two of them, and annoyingly a lot of the Breeds family all have the same names. So their dad is called Boycott, but one of their sons is called Boycott as well. And then of these three brothers, one of them's called Thomas, and one of them's called Thomas James, and one of them's called Mark. So effectively this guy named two of his sons Thomas. But anyway, they were very entrepreneurial, grassroots, feisty, clearly brilliant at negotiating, clearly brilliant at skirting the law but surviving, and they built up very successful businesses, and they had hands in a lot of different pies in the America Ground and in wider this part of Sussex. So they had all sorts of different things going on, irons in the fire, and at the same time they had often quite a gladiatorial relationship with the Hastings Corporation. For example, early on, one of the Breeds brothers takes on the corporation for what he sees as a crime. He thinks that they've been stealing from a charity and divvying up peppercorn rents between them, and he takes them to court as a pretty young businessman, and he wins. And so you can imagine, we don't have much evidence for how people felt about it, but you can imagine if you're part of this esteemed corporation and you've been getting away with a lot of stuff for years, up comes this young businessman who at the same time as negotiating with you and dealing with you and doing all these things is like exposing your corruption. It's great. But then I think they wouldn't have liked him at all, but at the same time they probably would have liked him because he's making lots of people lots of money. Meanwhile, inside the family there is all this there's basically, at some point there are constantly, as with any family, there are constant fights going on, but I latched on to one particular feud. I'm not 100% sure how strong the evidence is that there's just one specific feud running all the way through, but I really like the idea of these brothers who've been allies, and they've built homes next door to each other, and they've built these businesses next door to each other. They're a big part of the building of Wellington Square and all these kind of big local things. And as you say, they Julie pointed out, they open up that first rope walk, and that really sets the architecture for the warehouses and the industrialization of that corner, because you've got to build everything around your straight rope walk. So they have a huge impact on the shape of things, but at the same time they're constantly fighting each other. And I love this story. Also, one of MSL's team, John, was nervous because the Breeds family are still people who live in Hastings and are still around. John was a bit nervous about me writing a song about them, especially because I planned to use their real names and make it as accurate as I could. And I've actually found that really helped me in the composition process, because John's nervousness about talking about the Breeds becomes the chorus of the song. It's like, don't speak about these people, we need them too much, they're too important to us. So I really like that he'd found me a route in to the songwriting process.
Sounds great, Chris. Shall we have a listen to the Battling Breeds then?
Don't get caught taking the piss out of the battling Breeds. They're the only men with wealth enough to hold a paper lease. Someday you may need their help for a job or a loan at least. So don't get caught taking a mickey out of the battling Breeds. Thomas and Mark made their start selling to the building trade. One's a firebrand, one's a schemer, soon their cash was made. In 1810, young Thomas Breeds takes on the corporation. He proves to the court that they had stolen charity donations. Corruption ruined a local school, Thomas got it mended. And after that, for the Hastings mob, the brothers were unfriended. But the family Breeds had done so well, the fortune soon was sealed. For Christmas 1815, they bought the Priory Field. Mark Breeds built a hotel there with houses both sides planned. Investors had a bidding war and they gave him 16 grand. Then they got into breweries, ran coaches everywhere. The beautiful street was near complete, they called it Wellington Square. So don't get caught taking a piss out of the battling Breeds. They're the only men with wealth enough to hold a paper lease. Someday you may need their help for a job or a loan at least. So don't get caught taking a mickey out of the battling Breeds. After that, and we don't know why, the brothers' friendship ended. Even with the wealth and fame, never was it mended. They feuded loud for many a year, had a punch up in the street. Got hauled up by the local court, paid fines to keep them sweet. I never want to see his face again, Mark was heard to mutter. If he comes near, Thomas shouts, I'll kick him in the gutter. Now this was quite a problem, since for years they lived next door. They used to treat both homes as one, now they built a 10-foot wall. So don't get caught taking the piss out of the battling Breeds. They're the only men with wealth enough to hold a paper lease. Someday you may need their help for a job or a room or a loan or a ride at least. So don't get caught, no loose talk, no loose chatter of men who matter. No, don't get caught behind your sleeve, laughing at those crazy battling Breeds.
Chris, when I heard this song, made me think about Chas and Dave, and but in a good way. Those kind of Cockney,
they're amazing. Chas and Dave are brilliant.
Yeah, Cockney sing-along type songs down the good old knees up. That's what you wanted to create.
Definitely, the roots of that are the same as what I wanted to create, which was I was thinking about old music hall type comedy songs, that kind of thing of playing in a kind of wooden square hall with loads of people all chaotic singing along, and the kind of cheeky chappy type personas. Yeah, I love that idea, and it was a way to tell the story. It needed some humour, but it also needed to be, it was quite long and telling quite a convoluted story, so I thought that was a way to do it. Listening back to these, I'm aware my voice hasn't got quite the kind of macho resonant. I'm not quite deep enough for these songs. It's funny because it's sung, a lot of it's for a kind of slightly more music theatre-y, choir-y sort of singer, more kind of deep, and so I hearing back it that some of the jokes don't quite land because I sound too sort of middle class and high, but I still really love the idea of it.
Also made me think with these the cumulative folk songs where you start off, you've got like verse 1 and then you get to verse 2 and you add a bit of verse 1 to that, and then you add a bit of verse 2 to that, a bit like the Breeds Brothers are picking up all these different things. And I was thinking particularly about Herring's Heed, which is a folk song about what you can do with your herring once it's been gutted and the fish has been packed off. You've got lots of bits left. You've got the head and the fins and the tail and all sorts of things. And this is I'll just do a few little verses just to demonstrate, because I felt like this from at the end of the chorus when you said I find a job or a room or a loan or all the different things that you could do, and that made me think of this one. Oh, what'll I do? Oh, hang on a second. One thing. Oh, what'll I do with my herring's heed? Oh, what'll I do with my herring's heed? I make it into a loaf of breed, herring's heed, loaf of breed, and all manner of things. Of all the fish that live in the sea, the herring is the one for me. Oh, what'll I do with my herring's eyes? Oh, what'll I do with my herring's eyes? I'll make 'em into puddings and pies, herring's eyes, puddings and pies, herring's heed, loaf of breed, and all manner of things. Of all the fish that live in the sea, the herring is the one for me. Oh, what'll I do with my herring's gills? Oh, what'll I do with my herring's gills? I'll make 'em into windowsills, herring's gills, windowsills, herring's eyes, puddings and pies, herring's heed, loaf of breed, and all manner of things. Of all the fish that live in the sea, the herring is the one for me. And it goes on. Herring's guts get made into a pair of butts, and herring's tail gets made into a barrel of ale, and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, that's great.
That's such a lovely type of song. I didn't quite manage to make it properly like that, but I love those. I mean, the one that everyone knows is 12 Days of Christmas or whatever, but that sort of building and building, because it also works as a humour device, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's the Breeds Brothers. They've got the bank, they've got Hastings Bank, they've got the breweries, then they're building houses, then they're building rope walks and lime kilns and ships, and they're just like serial entrepreneurs, actually.
One thing I'm slightly sad about is because of lockdown taking place and plans getting changed, I never got to go and speak with anyone in the family, and that was on my little bucket list of things I still had to do. This song came together very late in the process, and I would have loved to have just found out more reasons.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. And we're going to go back over to Julie now to give us a little bit of a background about the events that led really to the demise and the eventual clearing of the America Ground. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Debbie. The Breeds were incredibly successful, and part of their entrepreneurial building of Hastings had the effect of really encouraging people to come down to this town. The whole of the south coast of England had become really popular. So this was the same era that Brighton Pavilion was being built by Prince George, then later King George IV. So the rich, the wealthy, even royalty were starting to come down to Hastings. So if we could have a look at the first slide, we should be able to see. It's a similar view to what we saw before. So you've got the houses of the America Ground nestling right at the very front there by the shore, and behind it you can see Wellington Square, the much smarter building which has been going on. That's what the new people coming into the town want to see when they come down here. When Princess Victoria came down in 1834, she had to travel, and in those days there was only one road into Hastings, and that was the road that came down from the ridge through the old town, and then if you look right along to the right where you can see the gap between the two cliffs, she would come down between these two cliffs on the old London Road, and then along the seafront over the Priory Bridge and make her way to St Leonard's, because that was also being built at this time. So Burton St Leonard's started in 1827. So wealthy people didn't really want to come down and see ramshackle buildings and industrial complexes on the seafront. And tensions started to rise over the ownership of the land because people really wanted to develop it. So people started laying claim to this land. One of the chief contenders was the Corporation of Hastings that Chris has already mentioned. They really wanted to be able to charge rents for this land. This time they couldn't because they didn't own it. It was outside of their jurisdiction. And you can see up on the hill the castle that was owned by Lord Chichester. So the fact that the land was directly underneath his land meant that he could lay claim to it as well. And there was one other family who were involved, which was the family that owned the Priory Farm. The Priory had once owned huge amounts of land around the whole of Hastings, including the field that Priory Meadow Shopping Centre still stands on today. So there were these major contenders for ownership of this land. And it wasn't long before disputes over the land reached the ears of the Crown. So in December 1827, some Crown commissioners were sent down to decide once and for all who owned this land, who was going to have the right to develop it, and who would therefore make money out of it. The fact that this had all once been under sea and had once been the original harbour of Hastings meant that actually it belonged to the Crown, as all the sea out to 12 nautical miles around the whole coast of England belongs to the Crown. So it didn't take them very long to decide that. The Crown found in their favour, and the people living on this ground were given notice to clear their buildings and get off the ground. They weren't asked to do so immediately. They were given 7 years in which to get out. So it wasn't a question of just like pack up and go now, but they knew that the days of the America Ground were coming to an end. If we look at the next slide, we should be able to see a plan. Again, I think it's the same plan that we saw before. We zoomed in before and looked at the rope walk, but you can see the writing that's diagonally across this shaded area at the front says Old Sea Beach, now covered with buildings. And that is the clue to why they were going to decide for the Crown, because it had been sea. If we look at the next slide, we can see exactly the same area with the houses in situ. Every one of these, it's not very clear on this plan, but every one of these is numbered. In some cases you can see the names. So if you look at these larger squares, just here you can see Thomas James Breeds. There's Thomas Breeds elsewhere and Boycott Breeds. These are the warehouses and yards that the Breeds family owned. But even the tiny little dwellings, which are very small indeed, some of them just cottages, they were all listed. All the people that lived in them were listed. And we know from the survey that accompanies this, there's a written description of all the names, the businesses, the amount of property they had, what was going on there, and the value of the property. So we know exactly what was going on in this place. And we know that there were lots of animals. The houses were cottages. They had piggeries attached to them. There was a tremendous amount of life here on the America Ground. At its height, in the middle of the 1820s, up to 1,000 people, it's thought, were living here at that time. So we're talking about the livelihoods and lives of a lot of people. So as I say, they were asked to move. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll be able to see. This is a detail of that plan, which you can just about make out the Thomas James Breeds merchant and the list of people that you can see. So we don't need to dwell too long on that. But here you can see really how difficult it was getting in and out of the America Ground. So I talked about Princess Victoria coming down and how difficult it was to get to St Leonard's. This is the route over the White Rock at that time that was impassable in really bad weather, and very often you'd have to go up and over the hill. That was an even more difficult route. Some of the people that lived on the America Ground were labourers, builders. They were already employed in the building of Burton St Leonard's down towards the west. And those people were able to dismantle their houses and put them onto carts and carry them stone by stone all the way down to Burton St Leonard's, where they rebuilt their houses. And if you know the area around London Road, that includes Shepherd Street, North Street and the top end of Norman Road, there are still a lot of houses still standing today in those streets that first saw life on the America Ground. They've been in existence that long. So the final slides show the area after the clearance. So, but they, as I say, they were given 7 years in order to leave, and by 1835, the area had been completely cleared. It was known as the derelict lands, and the plan that was drawn up with all those houses marked out actually describes it as a plan of the derelict lands of Hastings. And the land did in fact stay derelict for another 15 years after it had been cleared. Only one thing was allowed to be kept, and that's this structure you can see just at the base of the cliff towards the right. There's a kind of a carriage going in front of it. Looks like a tower. That's another lime kiln, and that was actually cut into the cliff. So the cliff had in fact been cut away by Boycott Breeds, and because the cliff was not part of the sea, that land did not belong to the Crown. So the lime kiln was allowed to stay, but everything else had to go. Because of the difficulty of getting around to St Leonard's, the White Rock was also demolished in late 1834, early 1835. And you can see, if you go along to the left, the road curving around the cliff with some building in front of it. This is the new road that was put in to make the access between the two towns much more easy for those coming down. If we just go on to the next slide, there's just 2 more slides to see. This shows another view of the cleared America Ground, looking really beautiful, almost idyllic. It'd be quite nice to still see it like that today. To Prospect Place, that's where the view is taken from. You can see some people here on the left-hand side, right at the top of Prospect Place, and you can still stand in that location now. The view won't any longer look like this. It will look like the next slide. Patrick Robertson was granted a lease by the Crown to develop the land, and within the space of 5 years, from 1849 to 1854, he built what is still there today, Robertson Street and the surrounding area. And it survives today as an almost unique example of a complete Victorian townscape. It's hardly changed since the time that he built it, but very, very different to what was there before. So that's a view that will still look familiar to many people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. And yes, that is the Hastings that we know and see today, isn't it? So we're going to listen now to the song 8 Acres, which actually the day that they make that decision that they're going to award the lands to the Crown, it takes place in a room above the George pub in Battle. So none of the local residents are able to go because it's too far away. And the decision is made to award the land to the Crown. And this song, 8 Acres, tells us all about that.
Today, let it be known, an inquiry held by the Crown for 8 acres, and who will own that same land on which you settled down, was held in battle above the George. Far too far to go for you to plead your cause. Besides the Crown, 4 parties called it theirs. We say it's royal land, they claim a share. One holds the castle, one holds the farm. Hastings Corporation is a third, and then Sir Godfrey chanced his arm. 200 buildings, 1,000 souls. But in that room above the George we took control. We are the judge and jury, we are the law. We find in favour of ourselves, of course, who we award. And so now you are squatters all. So now you are squatters all. And so now you are squatters all.
Stirring stuff, Chris. That makes me think of musical theatre. It is purely drama.
Oh, thank you very much. That's really kind of you. It was, you're spot on, basically. It was influenced by, there's that thing in musical theatre where you have a ballad and everything stops, all the energy is sucked out, but the ballad isn't a romantic ballad, it's the villain. And I love that kind of dark moment in a music theatre where you get it's quite often it's the villain being honest, isn't it? It's the moment where the villain, it's like a kind of Iago soliloquy. It just works perfectly for the style of almost like a heartbroken ballad, except they're saying I'm going to win, you're going to lose. And I was very influenced by also whenever white people sing in Hamilton the musical, then you know it's got that kind of somewhat villainous vibe to it. So I like that a lot. And I wanted a real quiet moment rather than I didn't want the villain. I mean, it's a bit biased to me saying they're the villain, but they are totally the villain. They are just going to take these people's land. It's resonant for now. It's resonant for who controls things. Land ownership is so at the core of so much of our politics and our social problems now. And it's also something that's re-emerged right through history. But yes, I really loved that way of let's quieten down and have a solo voice do this thing and just outline. Yeah.
That was the thing. It's just that one person. It's that one man coming and saying, "Oh, by the way, you can't live here anymore."
Yeah, and the level of power. It's the thing they don't have to shout. It's the
yeah, exactly. So the chords and the harmony. See, I love this. Is probably my favourite song of all of them.
Oh, thank you.
And I really like the chord sequence. So we're in A minor, but actually quite a lot of the chords that feature in this song are major chords, which is quite interesting. So we use C, and you're obviously E major there to lead you back into the A minor, but then sometimes we go up into F, and that's the chord that's based on the sixth. Now we use it a lot when songs are in a major key, because the sixth. So if I'm in C major, we've got the chord on the sixth is A minor. It's a very common progression to follow. But when you're in a minor key, the chord on the sixth becomes major, and it sort of lights. It's almost like it lights the song up. So if you don't mind me just doing a little reference to Les Miserables.
No, not at all. That's great.
Yeah, lots of songs in minor keys in that, and I thought particularly I wanted to look at just quickly Castle on a Cloud, which is also in A minor. So this is little Cosette. She's working away, sweeping the floors, and she's been put to work. The Thénardiers are supposed to be looking after her, and they're not. They're treating her very badly. And so to escape from everything that's happening around her, she imagines that she has a castle on a cloud where she can go and she can be a child and she doesn't have to work and no one's going to shout at her. And it's just interesting because the chord sequences, there's some similarities here. So we've got the first little bit of the tune in Castle of Cloud, and there we are, we're back in the minor key, and then we're moving into the major, and here comes that magic F major chord. I just love it. And then she finishes off with not in my castle on a cloud, and that's that very low in her register. I noticed you did that in the song there, and so now you are squatters.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's that descending, it just descends rather than doing a big flourish and going up. It just goes, and it's emphasizing the kind of finality of it. I suddenly thought then, I wonder if that going to the major, I wonder if what that does is false hope. I wonder if there's a thing about if you go to that, especially the F chord you're talking about, which is so beautiful, and it kind of almost fools the listener into thinking they're going to go to a nicer place. And then when you don't, at the end, you pull them back. Maybe that's what's going on. I mean, I'm not intellectual enough about my composition to have gone, right, I'm going to do this clever false hope thing. But there is something about that in the song as well. And yeah, I love the idea of that as a chord thing.
And it's definitely more sinister, as you say, coming down, bringing it down at the end there. Rather, as you say, he could have just shouted at everyone and said, right, get off, you're all evicted, but actually he doesn't. So we're going to move on now because sadly we are running out of time. So the final song that we're going to play is Eviction, which is the last song in the series of 10. And Chris, you're gone. Okay. So I just wanted to just say very quickly.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
I'm still here in spirit.
Okay, that's good. I'll just talk. Yeah, that's great. So just quickly, we won't talk too long. Say, oh, you're back. That we haven't got much time, but we're only going to play one verse of this eviction. But basically, you tell the story of those final years there as people. Now, what's interesting is it wasn't some great eviction, was it? At the end, I had ideas that people they'd all be standing their ground and fighting the establishment, but actually they all pretty much went of their own accord for various reasons, didn't they? And
yes, and they were given a lot of notice, so it's not like one of those things. I think I'd imagined when I first got involved with the project that this was going to be about a forced eviction, and in a way I equated the whole story to other stories where if you're going to kick a load of people off land, it's going to become a pitched battle, and they reoccur throughout history, right up to modern times, and they still reoccur now. But in fact, because they had 6 years notice effectively, and a lot of them already had work going on elsewhere, so it was more of a just, right, I know that we've got to move at this point, so let's move. And then they just drifted out. Also, what I hadn't known was some other things went wrong, and a lot of changes were taking place anyway, particularly in the last year or so. Like, as Julie mentioned, the road getting cut through and the cliff being cut back. And a lot of changes there was also a really bad storm that damaged a lot of houses. So there were reasons to move on. So I think that eviction is much more of a melancholy thing than a big climactic battle.
Yes, and what's really great is that you tell us the story from just one person's perspective, so we get a real kind of human touch to it, his story and his reminiscence. And later in the song, we're not playing that bit, but later he goes back 10 years later and sees the land is still empty and desolate, and it was like, this used to be our home. So it's a very poignant and moving song, Chris. It's lovely.
Oh,
and
thank you.
The verse that we're going to play is when he and his family move, and actually a lot of people took down their houses and moved them on a cart over to St Leonard's and rebuilt them, because obviously they didn't own the land, but they owned what they had built their houses with, and so they physically dismantled them piece by piece and then rebuilt them over the way in St Leonard's. So this last song, so thank you, Chris, is
thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Eviction.
We moved down the coast to St Leonard's to work on Mr. Burton's town. We took our buildings on our backs, put them back up on his new ground. Everything I owned in a wooden cart, dragged by the kids and the wife. I burnt that flag we'd carried so high, left the America ground behind. So it's not an eviction, not like how I imagined anyhow. More like a river redirected, and we all flow down, down, and down.
So that brings us to the end of today's Salon. All that remains for me is to say thank you to my guests, Julie Gidlow, and of course, Chris Thorpe-Tracey. Thanks too to Laura at Isolation Station. So that's all from me, Debbie Warren. Next week's Salon is Sonic Lockdown with Kevin Grist. So we'll just let Chris sing us out with one final chorus of Eviction from A Derelict Chorale.
No, it's not an eviction, not like what I imagined anyway. More like a river redirected, and we all flow away, 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 flow away.
Come to the fair, all our friends are there. Margot is wearing the head of a bear. Willow is scared